Scott, would you mind back? Oh, wow. Let me calm down a little bit. Would you mind backing up one slide? Oh, I can do that from here, can't I? Yeah, there we go. Last week, someone, I think it was Angel, asked about the size of Israel and asked if I were to compare it to one of the states around. Pardon? Oh, it was Betty? Okay. If I were to compare it to one of the states, which one would it be? And I chose New Jersey. On the way home, I thought about finding a map of Israel and overlapping it with the state of New Jersey and bringing it in here to show you. Well, it turns out I'm not the first one to make that comparison. Someone else had already done it. And when I went to the web to go find some maps to overlap, I come across this map, so I didn't spend the time doing that. Someone had already done it for me. And so you can see that Israel is just slightly larger than the state of New Jersey. I can't read the numbers from here, but land mass is, if I remember right, it says 10, I think it's 10,000 square miles, whereas New Jersey's about 77,000 square miles. But that's just there for your comparison. Last week we started discussions on Genesis chapter 13. We concluded our discussions with verse 10 and with the cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, and Zorah. Continuing in verse 11, Abraham and Lot have now agreed to part paths, with Lot going east and then south into the Jordan plain. In verse 17, God tells Abraham, or Abram at the time, "Go, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So that leads us to verse 18 on the next slide. So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. Now, as I've done in the past, if the text is in red, it means I'm going to talk about the translation. And if the text is underlined, that means those are potential place names that we'll talk about. About 4 weeks ago, when we were talking about the plains of Moreh at Shechem, we talked about the possible translations of the Hebrew word Elon into English. The NIV is the only English version that translates Elon into the great tree. Some other English versions translate Elon to oak tree or terebinth tree. However, the King James Version, the New Messianic Version, the Geneva Bible, and several others translates Elon into the phrase plains of. So the term Elon can either refer to a great tree or to a plain. Now, in this particular verse, I'm not sure which one applies here. I prefer the plains of Mamre, and when I show you the topographical map on the next slide, you'll understand why. I don't think this showed up as well on this screen as it does on my computer. This is a topographical map of the area surrounding modern-day Hebron, and before I go on, the city of modern-day Hebron is so much greater, so much larger than the ancient city of Hebron that it covers the entire plains and spills over in just about every direction. The area in the oval in the center is a mountainous plain. There's a ridge to the west, and there's a ridge to the right. Now, the ridge to the west slopes down into the coastal plains, and then somewhere about in here is the modern-day city of Gaza, which is on the shore. The ridge to the right, which is here, slopes down into a desert area, and then into the Dead Sea, and then into the Jordan Rift Valley. Any questions on that before I move? Okay. So we have two place names from Genesis 13, verse 18, and I've added the field or cave of Machpelah. I'll just refer to it from here on out as the cave of Machpelah, from Genesis chapter 23. Many of the chapters in Genesis link the cave of Machpelah with the plains of Mamre and Hebron, so that's why I'm adding it to the slide. And we'll talk about the plains of Mamre first. The Hebrew term Mamre has several meanings. It can mean well-fed, abundantly supplied, vigor, or strength. However, Genesis chapter 14, verses 13 tells us that the name of the place called Mamre is named after an Amorite man named Mamre, who was a friend of Abraham, so there's no special meaning here. The term Mamre appears 10 times in the Bible, all of them in Genesis. Twice it refers to the Amorite man named Mamre, and the other 8 times it refers to the place named after the Amorite man named Mamre. There were some significant biblical events which occurred at Mamre. First, Mamre was the place that Abram went to after he and Lot departed paths. Abram was still at Mamre when he got word that he had been captured by the kings of the east. Some 20 to 25 years later, Abram was visited by 3 angels while at Mamre and was told that Sarah would have a son. During this visit, the angels told Abram that they would destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Actually, not in my notes here, but another 25 years after that, Sarah was buried in the cave of Machpelah, which is near Mamre, and then after that, Abram was buried there. Isaac settled in Mamre after Jacob went to Haran to obtain his wives, and then Jacob was living in Mamre when he sent his son Joseph to check on his brothers at Shechem. So Mamre, Hebron, the caves of Machpelah, that area is heavily associated with the 3 patriarchs and their wives. They spent a significant amount of time living there. I always pictured Abraham as living in tents, which he did, even in Mamre, but wandering all over Israel. And during this particular study, I came to the realization that he may have wandered through Israel, but he spent 50 to 60 years at the Hebron area. He pitched his tents up, raised his herds, and pretty much settled there in the Hebron area. This is a satellite view of modern-day Hebron, and you can see, at least maybe you can tell, that there are houses and buildings all over those plains there. The ancient city is at the bottom center of the map here. There are 3 proposed sites for the plains of Mamre. Today, all 3 sites are heavily urbanized areas north of the ancient city of Hebron. All 3 sites are within 1.5 miles of each other and within 2 miles of the ancient city of Hebron. The identification of Mamre was first proposed to be at this site here in Khirbet Nimrah, which, as you can see, is about 1/2 mile away from Hebron. And this identification was made during the Persian and Hellenistic periods. Later, during King Herod's time, he moved the identification of the site 1.5 miles away to Ramat el Khalil, up here, where the identification remained through the Roman and the Byzantine eras. Later, around 1150 AD, the identification was moved again about 1 mile southeast from Herod's location to this Khirbet et Sibti, right here. Only minimal archaeological excavations have been performed at the three sites, so a firm identification cannot be made at this time. Given the heavily urbanization of the sites and the current political control by the Palestine Authority, archaeology studies of the site probably won't happen anytime soon. If you think about it, Abram was living in a tent and he had herds of sheep and goats and various cattle, donkeys, etc. From an archaeological perspective, there's not a lot to find there unless Abram went out and made a plaque and says Abram was here and had that planted. We're not going to find archaeological evidence of the plains of Mamre. I personally tend to think that the Persians had it right. When I show you the cave of Machpelah here in just a few seconds, you'll see that this is the closest site, and it's probably the site, but there's no way to prove it. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. We were. Yeah, it goes down and slopes down into a desert area, and then you've got the Dead Sea, and down at the south of the Dead Sea are the cities of the 5 cities of the plains. So yes, you're right. Right on target. For those who couldn't hear, he was asking about that mountain range. Let me move back 2 slides. I was talking about this range here. And you can't tell it from this slide, but that's fairly steep. It's a very steep slope. It drops down pretty quickly. This area in here is all desert, and just off to right about in here is the Dead Sea, and just south of that is the Valley of Siddim, which we'll talk about next week again.
Did you say that this is modern-day Iran?
No, this is modern-day Hebron. This is in the West Bank in Israel. The cave is well known. In fact, I'll get to that in a few slides. But yeah, the cave is well known, has been evaluated. Let's see. So I'm about to leave the plains of Mamre and go into the cave next, as a matter of fact. Genesis chapter 23 tells us that Abraham purchased a field and a cave of Machpelah from the Hittite Ephron to use as a tomb to bury his wife Sarah. We're told in verse 17 that the field is near Mamre. That's why I've included it into this slide of place names. If you're going to try to find the plains of Mamre and Hebron, then finding the cave makes sense. Today, the cave is well known. Between 31 and 4 BC, Herod built a large rectangular enclosure sealing the cave to commemorate the site for his subjects. Today, it's the only fully surviving Herodian structure remaining. You know, Herod the Great was known as the Great Builder. He built a lot of structures all over Israel, and this is the only one that fully remains. All of the other ones have been partially destroyed. Herod's structure had 6-foot thick stone walls but did not have a roof. During the Byzantine era, a church was built on the site using Herodian walls, providing an overhead cover. In the 600s AD, the church was converted to a mosque. 500 years later, during the Crusades, the area was again converted to a church. 88 years later, the Muslims again took control of the site and converted it back to a mosque. Between 1318 and 1320, the Muslims expanded the mosque and erected 6 monuments, one each for Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah, who are believed to be buried beneath the site. So this is the same satellite map that I showed you earlier, except that I've added the location of the cave of Machpelah right here. So that's one of the reasons I think these 3 are the region visited most by Abraham. In Hebrew, Machpelah means doubled. It turns out that the cave of Machpelah has two chambers or caverns inside the cave. The patriots and their wives are believed to be buried in the inner or the second cavern. Machpelah is mentioned 6 times in the Bible, all of them in Genesis. The first 2 mentions are in relation to Abram's purchase of the cave. The other 4 mentions relate to the burial of the patriarchs or their wives. This is a photo of the Mosque of Abraham, as it's called by the Muslims, which is built on top of the walls, which was built by Herod. So you can see the walls from about here down were built by Herod, and then from here up were built by the Muslims. When Herod built the enclosure over the cave, he sealed the cave entrance under the floor of the structure. The entrance appeared to remain sealed until 1981, when a team led by Noam Arnan, a doctoral student at the time, chiseled through the Herodian floor of the mosque. He and his team found a 2-chambered cave with human skeletons and pottery. The bones were not disturbed. A few months later, a team of archaeologists led by Dr. Zeev Yavin, chief archaeology officer for the Judea and Samaria, entered the cave through the chiseled entrance in the floor. They examined the cave and also found human skeletons, which they also did not disturb. Dr. Yavin dated the double cave to the Middle Bronze Age period, which is the same time frame as Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. Since neither group disturbed the bones, no archaeological evidence confirms the identities of those buried in the cave. This is a schematic of the inside of the building that the Muslims built over the Herodian structure, over the cave of Machpelah. The room is divided into 2 sections. Division here, you've got the leftmost and the rightmost. This happens to be north and that happens to be south. The section on the left has 4 monuments, each housed in a separate octagonal room. The monuments at the far left are dedicated to Jacob and Leah. The monuments in the center are dedicated to Abraham. I said Sarah. The monuments in the center are dedicated to Abraham and Sarah. The section on the right has 2 monuments, and they're dedicated to Isaac and Rebekah. The entrance at the bottom of the diagram here, there's an entrance here and here. I'm talking about this entrance now. Goes through a mosque. All Jews who enter the building must go through the mosque to get to this entrance. That was done on purpose to discourage Jews from visiting the site. Jews are then allowed only in the corridor to the immediate right, so they come in here, can go to the immediate right, and they can view anything they want to on this section, but they're forbidden from going into that section. Muslims are allowed to enter at either entrance, and they can see anything they want to see. The actual entrance to the cave below is right here. That's where a graduate student chiseled into the floor. This entrance has since been covered and no one's allowed to enter today. Any questions about the caves of Machpelah? Yes?
Why are Muslims allowed to enter that area and not Jews?
Yeah, so it's in the West Bank. So Israel technically is occupying the West Bank, but it's still under Palestinian control. So the Palestinians control the mosque.
So that is a mosque, right?
So there's a mosque attached to a mosque, if you will.
Oh, okay.
They built a mosque over the cave. Just a second.
Okay, gotcha.
But they don't worship in that mosque today. Today they built a second mosque attached to this one, and to discourage Jews from from entering into this to see the graves, or not the graves, the monuments. The graves are in the cave, but to see the monuments that the Muslims erected, they require the Jews to enter into the mosque, which is not something a Jew wants to do. So it discourages them from entering. But if you're a Muslim, you're free to walk in from any entrance, and you're free to see whichever monument you want to see. Any other questions about the caves of Machpelah before I move on to Hebron? Yes, sir. It was a Byzantine. It would have been a Greek Orthodox Catholic church. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so we will move on to Hebron. The modern-day city of Hebron is a very large urban area in the West Bank region of Israel. It's currently under, well, I just said all this, currently under military occupation by the Israeli army, along with several internal Palestinian political fragmentation and a heightened level of violence. So there's a lot of violence in this area today, has been for many years. Hebron is not a single archaeological site, but an archaeological area consisting of numerous distinct sites, which include Tel Hebron, which is also called by the Arabic name Tel Rumiada, Rumiadi, I think it's Rumiadi. Word etymology here. The Hebrew word Hebron means friend or ally, and it's believed to be in reference to a friend and ally to Abram. The Arabic name Rumiadi, or Rumiadi, also means friend. So both groups named this ancient city because of the friend of Abram. There's the tombs of Jesse and Ruth. There have been no excavations there. There's the cave of the patriarchs with minimal excavation. There's Khirbet Nimrah with minimal excavation, but no reports written. There was Khirbet el Khalil with minimal excavation, but no reports written. There was Khirbet ep Sibti, which has not been examined. And there's Khirbet en Natzera, which is a conquest era site, so it would be interesting to take a look at that, but it has also been unexamined. A thorough archaeological examination has not really been done at any of the sites. However, there has been enough done to identify Tel Hebron with the biblical Hebron. And before we look at the archaeology, let's look at the biblical history of Hebron. But before we talk about the biblical history of Hebron, I'd like to point out that in Genesis 13:18, Moses again uses an anachronism with the name Hebron. Joshua 14:15 tells us that the city of Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba. Arba, after Arba the Anakite, or giant. Genesis 32:2 tells us at the time of Sarah's death, some 6 decades after Abram's arrival at the plains of Mamre, the city was called Kiriath Arba. The Bible also tells us that by the time of Moses and the Exodus, some 400 years later, the city was called Hebron. Based on the biblical accounts, the area around Hebron was occupied during the following periods. First of the book of Genesis tells us that Abram, Isaac, Jacob settled around Hebron. Abram purchased a lot of land with a cave from the Hittites, who were occupying the site at the time. This is the cave where Sarah, Abram, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah were buried. Numbers 13:22 tells us that after the Exodus, but before the conquest, Moses sent spies into the hill country. The spies went to Hebron and saw the giants, or the Anakites, there. The books of Joshua, Judges, and 1 Chronicles tells us that the Israelites killed Hoham, the king of Hebron, and then captured the city and killed all of its inhabitants. They also killed off all the Anakites or giants in the hill country around Hebron. Joshua also grants the land around Hebron to Caleb and designates the city itself as a Levite city and a city of refuge. Judges 16:3 tells us that Samson tore off the doors of the city gate of Gaza and then carried them to the top of the hill facing Hebron. So the city was occupied at the time of the Judges. The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st Chronicles tells us that after King Saul's death, the Lord told David to go to Hebron and wait there. David settles in Hebron with his family. Then the men of Judah appoint David as king of Judah. While he was in Hebron, David has 6 sons. 7.5 years after being anointed king of Judah, David is then anointed king of Israel. He then captures Jerusalem and makes his home in Jerusalem. Later, David's son Absalom goes to Hebron and declares himself king of Hebron and attempts an unsuccessful coup against his father. Nehemiah 11:25 tells us that some of the people returning from exile in Babylon returned to Hebron and its surrounding settlements. So when we look at the archaeology around Hebron, we expect to see evidence of occupation in each of these time periods. Before we go into the archaeology of Hebron itself, I want to remind you of some archaeological evidence found in Egypt supporting the existence of the city of Hebron during the conquest era. During week 6, I introduced the Amarna letters written by city rulers to the Pharaoh Amenhotep IV of Egypt. These letters were written around the biblical time frame of Joshua's conquest of Canaan. These letters were found at the archaeological site of El Amarna in Egypt. I showed this particular slide during week 6 as part of a series of slides from various cities to demonstrate that the Habaru mentioned in the tablets are the same people as the Hebrews of the conquest. This slide mentions 3 of the Amarna letters that mention the city of Hebron. There are a total of 10 Amarna letters that mention Hebron, and this is archaeological evidence that clearly indicates that Hebron was occupied by the Canaanites at the time of Israel's conquest into Israel, or into Canaan. So this slide lists the archaeological studies which were conducted in Hebron. Tel Hebron was first excavated by Philip Hammond of the Princeton Theological Seminary between 1963 and 1966. Excuse me. His work was interrupted by the Six-Day War in 1967. Because he was called to Jordan to begin a new excavation after the war, he only published a small amount of his work from Hebron. Hammond found evidence of occupation before the flood, during the patriarchal conquest, and King David periods. Israeli archaeologist Avi Ofer excavated between 1984 and 1986. He uncovered portions of a massive city wall dating to the patriarchal period. Israeli archaeologist Yuval Peleg excavated in 1998. He found 50 grave sites dating to the conquest and the King David periods. Israeli archaeologist Emanuel Eisenberg excavated in 1999. He uncovered portions of a 24-foot thick city wall, a gate tower, and steps leading down into the valley, all of which date to the patriarchal period. The gate tower and steps are believed to be the steps to the entrance gate described in Genesis 23:10, where Abraham stood and purchased the Machpelah cave. Emanuel Eisenberg returned in 2014. He uncovered walls dating to the King David period, going through the fall of Judah in 587 BC. He also found domestic houses with mikvahs, which are ritual purity baths, Jewish, dating to the Hasmonean period. In addition, he found 5 seals called the King's Seals. These seals bear the phrase king, and then bear the phrase belonging to the king, and Hebron, and date to the Assyrian invasion of Judah. I'll show you pictures of those seals in a few slides. So, this slide is a comparison of the biblical history and the archaeological findings at Hebron. The Bible is silent about the occupation of Hebron before Abram's time. The archaeological findings reveal that Hebron, or Kiriath Arba as it was called at the time, was a fortified settlement covering about 7.5 acres by the year 3200 BC, which is before the flood. There is a destruction layer which dates to the time of the flood, and it appears to have been abandoned for about 300 years after the flood. The Bible tells us that Hebron, or Kiriath Arba, as it was called at the time, was occupied by the Hittites at the time of Abram. Archaeological findings indicate that Hebron was rebuilt with larger fortifications and defenses around 2000 BC, which is after the flood but before Abram's arrival. Archaeological evidence indicates that during that time frame, the city was occupied by a Canaanite Hittite population. I'm sorry, not there yet. The Bible tells us that Abram purchased the cave of Machpelah from the Hittites while standing in a city gate. Archaeologists have found the city gate dating to this period as well as the cave itself. The Bible tells us that during the conquest, Hebron, as it was called by then, was occupied with the Amorites and the Anakites, tribes of the Canaanites. The Bible tells us that Joshua captured the city and killed all of its inhabitants. The Bible goes on to say that later, Caleb kills all of the Anakites in the settlements around Hebron. The Amarna letters from Egypt tell us that the Habaru attacked and captured the cities of Hebron. In addition, other archaeological evidence from Egypt indicates that just prior to the time frame of the conquest, Hebron was on a north-south trade route used by the Egyptians. Archaeological evidence at Hebron indicates that the Amorites, a sub-tribe of the Canaanites, occupied the city at the time of the conquest. Archaeological evidence also indicates the presence of Jewish inhabitants in Hebron beginning after the conquest era through the Judges and King David eras up to the Babylonian capture of Jerusalem. Archaeological evidence reveals that Hebron was destroyed and abandoned around 701 BC at the time of Assyria's invasion. The Bible does not specifically state that the Edomites occupied Judah after the Babylonian invasion, but it does hint at it in all the prophecies against it in Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Obadiah, and Ezekiel. Nehemiah 11:25 tells us that some of the Judeans returning home from exile in Babylon returned to Hebron and its surrounding settlements. Archaeology at Hebron tells us that the Edomites did indeed occupy Hebron for about 450 years, from approximately 586 BC to 125 BC, when they were forced to convert to Judaism by the Hasmonean dynasty. There is archaeological evidence that there was a strong Jewish presence in Hebron between 125 BC and 135 AD. So to summarize, archaeology strongly supports the Bible statements regarding Hebron. This is a picture of the staircase that dates back to before Abram's time. The wall on the left is estimated to be 4,500 years old, dating back to before the flood. Today, the wall is only about 9 foot high, but studies show that it was likely 30 feet high or taller when it was built. The wall on the right was built during the days of Abraham. The original gate of ancient Hebron lies at the end of the staircase. This is believed to be the gate of Hebron mentioned in Genesis chapter 23, where Abram purchased the cave of Machpelah. The picture on the left is an intact jar. Several of these have been found all over Israel. The picture on the right is a picture of one of the 5 king seals. So the intact jar is sitting upright. The picture on the right, the jar is laid down, and what you're looking at is the bottom of one of the handles. The seals were embedded on the bottom of the handles on clay jars containing food to be distributed to soldiers in the Judean army who were fighting a war against Sennacherib, the Assyrian army, around 701 BC. To date, over 2,000 of these seals have been found all over Israel, most of them around Jerusalem. These seals bear the phrase belonging to the king and then one of 4 city names. This particular seal bears the name of Hebron. The location of discovery of the handles appears to have no correlation to the locations of the seals. It's unclear if the city name on the seal is the origin of the jar or its destination. This is a photo of the tomb of Jesse and Ruth. Jesse is the father of King David, and Ruth is David's Moabite great-grandmother. This site is located at the highest point in Tel Hebron. Archaeologists date the building in the photo to around 1100 AD during the time frame of the Crusades. Just off to the right of the photograph is another small one-room building which dates to about 600 years earlier or to the end of the Roman period. That building appears to have been used as a small synagogue. The walls around the site appear to date back to the time of King David, and some people speculate that this site may have been the location of David's palace when he was the king of Judea, but there have been no excavations to prove it. And that is the end. Any questions?
What was blue in that photograph? What were the blue drawings?
In this photograph here, it's just paint. The door frame is paint. There's a gate in front of where the tomb is supposed to be. The tombs are supposed to be. You see I guess it's all ironwork that has been painted blue.
And then this is really interesting. I don't think that ever, at least this is news to me, that Canaan was the land of the forefathers. I don't think I ever really understood that God sent the Hebrew people from Egypt there because that's where the forefathers were buried.
Well, God had told Abram that he was going to give that entire region to him and his descendants. He also told Abram to go up the length and the breadth of and check it out. There's no indication that Abram did that in the Bible. He probably did, but it looks like to me, based on this particular study, that he spent some almost 80 years, 60 some odd years in the Hebron area.
I just don't think we ever talk about very much the length of why Canaan.
In that particular